Donald Thomas Scholz was born in 1947 in Toledo, Ohio. His dad was wealthy. He made luxury apartments in like a prefab thing, big time money. Mom was a classically trained pianist, and she insisted that Tom, as he ended up going by, became, trained on the piano somewhat. I love this story because it's like a big middle finger to the record company, or the record companies as they ran during that time. And you have to understand that when a record company got involved and signed an artist, they basically, in a sense, owned you. They told you how you could record, where you could record, what producer you might use. If you didn't have any stardom, you're just starting out, you're going to release your debut album. They've got enough interest in you to invest in you. They dictate the terms. You sign bad contracts because all record company contracts were bad. They benefited the company, not the artist. And so the fascinating part of the story is, in a sense, Scholz won. Sort of. Scholz, as a kid, was a curious mind, and he was always taking stuff apart and putting stuff back together and building go-karts, and he built his first motor at 12. He said he was fascinated by the way it worked, and he was also fascinated when the smoke started pouring out of it because something went wrong. But hey, that's how you learn, right? He grows up, he does really well in school. He gets into the prestigious school, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, and as a mechanical engineer. And about this time, he meets Barry Goudreau, another local musician at the time. And Scholz had a keyboard background, he's a pianist, sort of keyboard player. So they're playing local bars. Nobody's, they're playing cover songs and nothing's going anywhere. But Scholz took a keen interest in it. And after he met Goudreau, he decided he was going to learn guitar, and didn't actually learn to play until he was 21, which is really old considering how most guys do it. They usually either learn at a really young age, like 5, 6, 7, or most people during their teen years. You start the whole rebellion, you get into rock and roll, 13, 14, 15. Scholz learned at 21 and became quite good at it. He also played bass, he played organ, and he eventually learned to play drums. What he couldn't do was sing. So he's interested in rock and roll, primarily the Kinks, the Yardbirds, all the old stuff. But he gets really interested in recording. And initially he went to recording studios, paying $300 an hour to tinker around and fart around and try to figure stuff out. And it gets really expensive really quick. I mean, this is a hobby at this point. He's kind of moonlighting as a musician, playing in bar bands and stuff. It's not going anywhere. Around about 1970-ish, he starts writing his own songs. And he starts realizing, I can't afford to pay these studios $300 an hour to fiddle fart around at my own pace. But what he did have is mechanical engineering knowledge, and he started buying equipment and putting it in the basement of an apartment that he rented and basically building his own studio. Now you can take your time. Now you can work at your own pace. And he started building, and none of this stuff that he was recording, it's a whole thing's a learning process. There's some junk, I'm sure, through this whole period. So he's learning as he goes, and what he was hearing in his head, nobody had done. So he had to make some of the not the instruments, but the mechanical devices to make the sound that he wanted to hear. Now, also during this time, after he graduated from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he got a bachelor's and a master's degree in like 6 years. I mean, this is a bright guy, a genius. And he learned about sound, and he learned about the applications of sound and the productions of sound. He lands a gig, a daytime corporate gig, as a mechanical engineer at Polaroid. And one of the first projects he was put on was the early version of what became the camcorder. He used to go around and film people before phones. They wanted the earliest recording devices for visual had no sound, like the Super 8 cameras. My mother had one. And one of his early projects was to incorporate the sound aspect so you'd have audio and visual in your home recording deal. So he's working on this project. It's a corporate gig, pays well. He's taking his money and putting it into this basement studio. It's becoming an obsession at this point. And he's tinkering and he's writing these songs and he doesn't like it. So he's ripping this part out and putting this. This process goes on for at least 5 years. What he didn't have was a singer. And through Goudreau, he meets the incomparable Brad Delp, who at the time was working at Mr. Coffee, inserting heating coils and heating elements in coffee machines. Yeah. Hey, can you come in and sing? Delp has no ego. He's the rare form of singer that is phenomenal in talent and is just the nicest guy on the planet. So hey, they meet, they dig each other. You want to come sing on my project? I have a studio. Delp was kind of impressed. He's like, sure, I'll come sing on it. So over the course of 5 years, they're modifying these songs. Delp's doing the singing now, and he's got a phenomenal singer, which is rare as hen's teeth in the entire world of music. And this thing's kind of taken shape over the course of 5 years. Now, life is happening during this as well. He gets married, I think, 1971. They're trying to save money for a house. And Scholz has got this obsession with music in this basement studio, and various people are coming in to play, but primarily Tom Scholz played all these instruments himself. He played the bass, he played the guitar tracks, he played the organ and the keyboards, and he did have a friend that was a drummer, and then he has Delp, the ace in the hole, to come in and sing on this stuff. Delp's kind of leaving and coming back because there's just no money in it, and he's got to make a living, He's working at Mr. Coffee. By 1974, 1975, Delp's got a product that he thinks is good enough to potentially release as an album. So him and his wife start sending out letters and including these demo tapes to record companies. Back then you'd look them up in the phone book, no internet, and send a copy out. And he sent like 30 of these things. Every somewhat major label you could get a hold of, he would send a copy of it. His demo tapes, and you want any interest, because there was no band. It was just Scholz, occasionally Goudreau, occasionally Jim Mazdia, the drummer, and the ace in the hole, Brad Delp. Finally, after 30, 40 attempts at this, they get some interest out of 3 labels. And they sign with a CBS subsidiary called Epic Records. And Epic wants to hear the band live before signing. Trouble with that is there was no band. Scholz scrambles around. He gets a fill-in drummer that isn't Mazdia. I don't know what the dynamic was there. He gets Goudreau. Goudreau knows a bass player. They get Delp. They put on a good enough showcase for these CBS Epic execs to go ahead and sign. Only people that signed a record contract were Tom Scholz and Brad Delp, because there is no band. They don't even have a name. Finally got the record deal. Epic wants them to use a producer and a recorder. Scholz meets with the producer and says, I can't work like that. I can't go into a recording studio. I do this stuff myself. I'm playing all these parts. I wrote the songs. Over this time, he's figured out every little nuance and particular version. He's got his own equipment. It's kind of cobbled together. I mean, it works, but he works a certain way, and that way is by himself. And the producer they assigned to him, this John Boylan, says, well, we can't do it then. As he's walking out the door, he changes his mind and says, I tell you what, you do your thing here. Me and the rest of the band, quote unquote, are going to go to LA. We're going to work on some stuff. Scholz couldn't do the mastering at his house. You do your thing, get these parts down to the nth like you like them, hurry up with it. We'll be in LA, we'll do the mastering there, Delp do a few vocals, and we'll release this. And I'll split the producer's royalty with you 50-50. That was a big thrill for Scholz. They pull this off. The album is released. The band goes on tour. Mind you, during this, Scholz got a gig at Polaroid. He took a leave of absence to do this finalized recording thing because his demos aren't quite good enough. And his boss comes to him and says, I hear you're pursuing this music and you might be leaving the company. What's going on here? And Scholz was like, it's the chances of this happening are like 1 in a million. Don't worry about it. He takes a leave of absence. He does the production of the recordings, gets them down to a science, meets with the band, they release the product, they go on tour. The first show is like 200 kids in a gymnasium. Nobody knows the songs, it's not a big deal. Meanwhile, this album has been released on the radio now, spawned by the eventual hit single, More Than a Feeling, and it just takes off like a rocket ship. The second show, they got about 3,000 people here. This band is green. They haven't gelled. They haven't locked in together. They're not tight as they could be. The third show, there's a riot. They tore down the fences. The promoter got arrested. This thing has exploded now. They were supposed to go out for 6 weeks. It ended up being, I think, 7 months, and then they extended the tour another 3 months, which comes into play here in just a second. 10 months on tour doing stadiums. They were the headlining band out of nowhere. But there'd been 6 years prior to this of toil in that basement making these tapes. This album now is all over radios. It's selling like hotcakes. It ended up selling 17 million copies. At the time, it was the biggest debut album ever by anyone. It was unheard of to have that much success right out of the gate back then, and they did it. They didn't even have a band initially, and technically kind of still didn't, because Scholz did everything. He wrote the songs, he played the parts, he did the recording, he knew all the widgets and wazzits and how to get that sound. To this day, every song on that first album is played on FM radio nonstop to where you're almost tired of hearing it. So 10 months on the road, the record company has made a fortune off 17 million albums, and they want another album, like now, right now. And Scholz said that the pressure is just tremendous. The original Bad record deal they signed agreed to 10 albums in 5 years, and there's no possible way that Scholz can work like he works and produce that kind of thing. He's in violation of the terms of the record contract now. And P.S., we want another album now. It's been 10 months. He's like, well, we've been touring. Delp said in an interview, they went out in a station wagon, they came back in jet planes, and he called his accountant and said, hey, do I have enough money to buy a house? And the accountant said, well, you could buy about 30 of them if you wanted to. How much money do you need? Overnight, quote unquote, success. Huge stardom, fame, and pressure. We want another album now. Scholz didn't have but 1 or 2 songs ready. So he goes to work in his basement. He's going as fast as he can. 2 years passed by, unheard of at the time in the recording industry. Constant phone calls. Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Well, I got a 3rd song written. I got 4 songs now. We need an album now. Money, pressure, pressure, pressure. They finally came to his home and took what he had from him. 7 songs. So the second album, Don't Look Back, is a little short. They said they literally took the master tapes from him and said, you're done. We need an album. Don't Look Back, again, massive success. Sounded almost identical to the first album because a couple of the songs had already been written. He had those for an ace in the hole. He's just trying to piece together an album as quickly and as perfectly as he can. He has a very high standard of what he wants to release. They take it from him. Another massive success, I think initially sold 4 million copies. Went on to sell 7 million copies. Not as great as the 17 million of the initial album, but it turns out you can't lose your virginity twice. Still awesome by anybody's standards. Those first 2 albums, classics, staples on Rock Radio Day. If you haven't heard them, do yourself a favor and go back. They're basically perfect albums for a rock and roll band. In my opinion, that's the way it ought to be done. Awesome. The trouble with that is, Scholz only had about 25 good songs in him. Mind you, he's coming up with everything. All the parts. All the details and the little fills and all that. And the other, by this time, band, the touring band, they wanted to contribute. They wanted to help out. They had written songs. Delp occasionally, Brad Delp did contribute a few songs here and there, or major contributor on those first two albums. Scholz wouldn't take the other guy's stuff. I guess he didn't deem it as good as, quote unquote, the Boston quality that he demanded. And that caused contention within the band. Anyway, again, massive success. They go out on tour. They bled that thing dry. By the end of the tour, almost 1980 now, both Brad Delp and Tom Scholz said, I don't know that we ever want to do that again. It's just the recording industry is a dirty, nasty business, man, and it will chew you up. Mind you, both these guys aren't really partiers. They don't drink. They're vegetarians. They're pretty straight arrows. And they don't know if they ever want to produce it again after all this massive fame. CBS/Epic sues Scholz for breach of contract. You said 10 albums in 5 years and you agreed to it. Scholz said, I'm not releasing another thing until I deem that it is of the standard I set and as perfect as I can make it, period. He told the rest of the band by 1980, if you got solo projects you want to do or other things, other artists you want to play with, go do it. We ain't doing anything for at least a year. His new home studio that he had built with specific instructions on how to do it up was totally wrong. So he literally physically tore out walls, redid wiring. He has to have a certain way to work. That's what he wants. So that delayed the album. All this delays the lawsuit. Scholz eventually swaps labels. He goes to MCA. By 1986, he has another album ready. The trouble with that is, the first time the first album came out, Scholz was almost 30 years old. We're 10 years down the road now. He's almost 40. And it's hard to rock and roll when you're 40 years old. By this time, he's wealthy. He won the lawsuit against Epic. He got all his back royalty money. He's got all his touring money. And part of the contingency during the lawsuit was you cannot go and record in any studio ever. You're prohibited. Okay, I got my own studio. So he made this third album, finally. After all this time, 8 years now, after the second album, the album Third Stage comes out. It's got some hits. It's okay. But as this thing went along, nothing compared to those first two albums. He's older now. He's rich. He's comfortable. He's working at his own pace. It's hard to muster up the things that get you rock and roll the older you get. By this point, he fired everybody except for Delp. Delp, he actually quit and said, I will commit to a third album and I will help you with the tour. After that, I'm out. Boston releases Third Stage in 1986. It goes on to sell, I think, 4 million albums. Still great by anybody's standards. Massive world tour. They're playing 10 nights in a row at major, Philadelphia Spectrum type places. Packing them up, the demand, everybody's like, what happened to these guys? It had been 8 years. You just fell off the face of the earth. And now here you are with a brand new album. And it's kind of a little bit soft rock, pop. It's not the same as those first two albums. Again, the guy got old. 1994. Walk On. Brad Delp is not available. He's out. He's done. That's the magic. That's the guy that brought the songs to life, to quote Scholz himself. Scholz said, I wrote the songs, I did the parts, everything was there. Bradley Delp was the man that brought it to life with his vocal singing abilities. Well, he's gone. He can't record the album. He's got prior commitments. They get a replacement singer. The album's, It did sell 1 million copies. You see how the numbers have gone down and down and down and down, because Scholz only had about 20, 25 songs that were killer. They do tour for Walk On, which I happened to catch them then, saw them. That was the thrill of my young rock and roll life, with Brad Delp helping out on the tour only, doing the vocals. And they played mostly the first two albums, a couple of the hits from Third Stage, everything based on those first two albums. They played 3 songs from the new album. The point of touring at that time was to promote your new album. You know, should be the focus. They weren't stupid. The people wanted to hear the hits from those first 2 albums. Now there's another lawsuit that Scholz is involved in. Because he won that initial one against CBS, I think that brought him a little bit of an arrogance, like undefeated in the court system. And then it just became a lawsuit frenzy. He's suing everybody. The next album comes out in 2002, I think. Yeah, it does not go platinum. He sues the record company. You didn't promote it properly. And he pulls the album from shelves. Well, that ain't going to help it sell. This is corporate America. The ace in the hole, Brad Delp. Oh, you got Brad Delp. Why do you need another singer? There's, 2, 3, 4 singers on that album. Delp gets a couple of songs. You don't need another singer. You got Brad Delp. What are you doing? The next album, Life, Love, and Hope, something, I don't know. It's 2013. 11 years now to make an album. Are you kidding me? What are you doing? I mean, it takes time to create. And you can't put a timeline on it. But 11 years? Again, and my contention is Scholz only had 20, 25 really great songs. But hey, when you talk about greatness, those songs are great. I never get tired. I've heard those songs thousands of times, and I can still listen and hear things that I didn't hear before, and phenomenal. And some guys only have, a cup of coffee so big, and when that coffee's gone, the cup is dry. 11 years to make an album. I do like the story, though. I think it's interesting. I think, he fought the system that was totally, it's like David versus Goliath, but David doesn't even have the sling, and he still won initially. Scholz went on multiple lawsuits. He's suing band members for even using the name Boston in some of their advertising to help with promo. He sued the widow of Delp's widow, ex-wife. Bradley Delp sadly ended his own life in 2007, I think. Sad deal. I mean, great loss of talent, and just the man himself. By all accounts, everybody that ever met him or talked to him said he was the nicest guy in rock and roll. Always wanted to please others. But he was battling anxiety, depression, had massive stage fright, which blew me away reading that, from day one. I mean, he'd got on medication in the early 90s, trying to help with this anxiety and this depression stuff. It didn't help. He'd suffered his whole life from depression and ended up taking his own life. Scholz ended up suing his ex-wife. Just a mess. I ain't got time to get into all of it, but you can look it up on your own if you want. I am grateful to Tom Scholz for those first 2 albums. I mean, just awesome. Do yourself a favor if you like rock and roll and go back and listen to the first Boston album and the second one called Don't Look Back. Also some of the greatest cover art of all time back in the 60s, 70s. Almost everybody had awesome covers, or there were a lot of them. Boston having some of the coolest, with the spaceship guitar. Their guitars turned upside down. Each one of them is a city if you look close. Anyway, that's enough for now. Hey, thank you for watching. I do appreciate your time. Always appreciate your comments. I'll see you next time.